Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show, where we celebrate every single day from the Citizens Bank studio, the people who are working so hard to make coastal Mississippi, and Mississippi for that matter, such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, listen, yesterday I got some really sad news that a friend of ours, the class of Gulfport East 1975, a friend of ours, had a short bout with mental illness and committed suicide. And what was so shocking about that news was that he had retired in Florida. I had received really wonderful notes from him about enjoying retirement, and in fact invited my wife Ann and I over to visit with him, just loving life. And something happened, according to his son, that caused him to have some struggles the past few months. And it reminded me, we talk a lot on this show about mental health and about, we've certainly locked on to teen suicide. In fact, SuperTalk's going to launch an effort focused on bringing attention to teen suicide in Mississippi. But, you know, if there's a theme of this show, it is to always remember that others are going through something. You can never know what someone's going through. I said on the show some time ago, and we posted this at the Ricky Matthews Facebook page, but I said this, that empathy is the key to understanding others' journeys. Start by assuming that everyone is fighting a battle inside them you know nothing about. Let's embrace kindness and compassion as we navigate life's unpredictable paths together. I also ran across a quote in my history book from Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. And he once said this, that the greatest thing that we can do is help somebody know that they're loved and capable of loving. I think, you know, the thought that we never know what else someone is going through is something we ought to all kind of keep top of mind, that everybody is struggling with something. And if I sent a note to my brother-in-law this morning that I told him, don't snap. I don't plan to. We've got a lot to live for. And I also added, I'll add that if you ever feel like you need to, call me. Don't ever feel like you're alone. Reach out. There's so many ways to seek help. There's so many services out there that are ready to take your phone call if you're having a tough time. And if you're a friend of mine, call me, send me a note. I'll find ways to get you the help you need. But it's just sad to hear someone who was having such a wonderful time in this retirement found some struggles and ultimately, chose suicide. It's hard to hear that. It really is. Hey, listen, before we go to our guests, we're going to spend some time with my friend Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette. I wanted to bring your attention to last Monday's SuperTalk Outdoors Facebook page. I think you'll find it very important, very interesting. And what it's about is the last 2 years of work on the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission. And their work, they determine lots of things. They determine how we're going to manage diseases in the state, wildlife diseases. They determine hunting seasons. They have oversight over lots of policy as it relates to wildlife, fisheries, and parks in the state. And the representative from coastal Mississippi, Leonard Bentz, has someone described him as a bull in a china shop. But I did a review of the last couple of years as it relates to Leonard Bentz, who's actually up for confirmation in the Senate. I talked about the Senate confirmation process, et cetera. But if you missed that, I would really encourage you to go to the SuperTalk Outdoors Facebook page or to the SuperTalk Mississippi Facebook page and take a listen and see what you think. I played some segments from some commission meetings, and you be the judge. But if nothing else, it brings attention to the fact that we better pay closer attention to what's happening on the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, because too much of their work is out of sight, out of mind. That is for sure. It's a public entity that's doing public policy. They're determining the wildlife heritage of our state. And we need to take their work a heck of a lot more seriously. We need to pay much closer attention. So go take a look at that if you haven't seen it, if you have an interest in the outdoors in Mississippi. So with all that said, let's shift gears and move over to my friend Hunter Dawkins, who's the publisher of the Gazebo Gazette. He's a contributor, a significant contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi and SuperTalk Mississippi News. He's an award-winning small newspaper owner. I'm super proud of what he's been able to accomplish, and he continues to go right on down the road, kicking and screaming, making his company successful. It's good to see you, my friend. How you doing, Hunter?
Thank you, Ricky. I really appreciate that, and of course, I'm sorry for the loss of your friend and everything such. And I'm definitely understanding of those bills in the legislature. It's getting to be more, and I like where you're going with this stuff, Ricky. That you're promoting a lot more open government level and just following things on YouTube and SuperTalk and everything else, and that's what I also want to be contributing to at least as well. So
yeah, I know you do. Listen, one of the things that has really come to my attention, and it's something I worry about greatly. Ashley Edwards and I talked about it in the last couple of days on this show, and that is that with the degradation of newspaper resources, the digital tsunami, let's face it, if you go to any market in the United States, the newspapers typically had the most resources. That's just the reality. For many, many years, that's the way it was. And the digital tsunami, I would say the biggest thing the digital tsunami did is not reduce the number of readers that newspapers had. People have always been interested in news. Although I will add, it made for a sea of news choices, which then had to compete with for people's attention. But the biggest change was in the business model, where I spent most of my career, toward the end of my career before I retired. Most of my focus was on defining a sustainable business model that would enable newspapers and local news media websites be able to sort of sustain themselves. So not just to be nonprofit, because you can only be so successful with people contributing to your effort. Is there a business model that can help newspapers, continue to go forward? And it's been a lot of work in that area, a tremendous amount and there is actually, but you got to double down. And I think Advanced Condé Nast through Advanced Local has found a way. I was privileged to have the opportunity to work for them for a long period of time. But if you look at for companies that didn't fully embrace digital the way that we did, they're in trouble because they didn't make the decision before they had a degradation of their resources, both on the news side and in the advertising side, to change their business model. So what ends up happening is you're reacting to the digital reality and you don't have the resources you need to be able to react properly. It's a real issue. And so you're not making as much revenue as you did before. And so you're not able to fund news resources the way you were before. So you had, we had reporters going to every, city council meeting and every, building committee meeting, looking at building codes and changes in variances in codes, et cetera. We were watching all that stuff. The work of the public should be in the public domain. What happens is when you don't have people looking over public bodies' shoulders, they get chummy with one another. One thing leads to another. It's kind of a human thing to do. And they end up getting more and more down the road of doing the work of the public outside the public domain. So it's a problem, and it's something we've got to stay focused on, isn't it, Hunter?
Well, Ricky, I think you're certainly right in one avenue of at least the digital embrace. The problem that I think in this business plan, and something that I've learned too since being involved with the news industry, is controlling the narrative. That's where I think a lot of these newspapers, a lot of media, a lot of just television and such, they've lost because they don't control the narrative. They look at these agendas, whether it be local, whether it be state, whether it be federal, and they're like, well, what's going on? This is just a bunch of, blarging going on. No, there's something in there. There's something in there. And of course, your patience and, the ability to be able to go into feature stories. I think that's what's helped me in my business, at least from a community perspective, controlling the narrative.
What?
And when you can control the narrative, you can pretty much control what people want to be a part of and what they want to listen to and all the rest.
Well, I think that's an extraordinarily good point. One of the things that we did after I became publisher of the Sun Herald is we focused on what we call the South Mississippi strategy. So we even deployed our news resources based on that. And what we wanted to do is create a conversation about the region. But we understood in order to do that, we had to understand what's going on inside the region. So it meant you got to get deep into the counties. You got to get deep into the cities. When I come back on the other side, I'll talk about how you can actually do some aspect of narrative, not control, but establishing a narrative locally. The further you get away from local, the harder it gets. We'll continue our conversation with Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette when we get back on the other side. Well, welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette, somebody I really enjoy visiting with because the rubber hits the road with local news and information. It just really does. And Hunter has done such a good job of establishing his footprint for his newspaper and his website. And again, he's a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News. Hey, but when we went to break, Hunter had made the point that one of the difficulties is controlling the narrative. And listen, he's not suggesting that newspapers ever completely control the narrative. I mean, come on, even before the internet came along, you had competitors, you had TV, you had radio, you had newspapers and other newspapers. But the point is that we could establish some really important community conversations around something, and we could engage the public around it. And that, when you do that, that's a narrative. And the point that I was making about the South Mississippi strategy that we did, we now refer to it as Coastal Mississippi. Before, right after I became the publisher of the Sun Herald, we aligned resources within that regard. So we talked about what's happening in the regions and how we can come together as a region. And then we talked about what was happening in the local communities. But boy, if you start to lose those resources, then you start to lose what's really happening local. If we had a Hunter Dawkins in every city of coastal Mississippi, man, that'd be a step in the right direction. But one of the points that Ashley pointed out that I thought was just terrific and is very true. He said that because of where we are with social media and the internet and information, whether it be disinformation, misinformation, or truth information, that the problem is that truth used to be an objective fact. Truth was truth. But today, my truth and your truth may be different. And the person that's sitting in your lobby may have a different truth. We all have a different truth. And when we have a different view of truth, then we definitely are not going to be able to have any common conversation around what the narrative should be, especially if the narrative, and it should be, based on truth. But that is a big deal, isn't it, my friend?
Well, Ricky, one of the things I'll give you a perfect example of that I put on every single sports article that I write. The numbers don't lie. And I've learned that phrase from ESPN, following it a little bit, too, that's an indication of using statements like that to where people can read on to something. And from controlling the narrative is a little bit different than I think that you and I had kind of thought about. What I mean is, what are the important stories to you, and highlighting those in the ballpark figure first, and then kind of going on your writing down the stream. I told somebody, a resident this morning, that asked me, she said, well, how do you be able to come up with all these? I said, the most important thing is that I point out in the very first line of every story that I ever write, what's the big focus? What's the big part of this story? And then that's when you turn in the readers. They'll look to see, because not everybody likes to read, a long, fluent article. But if there's something that starts off the article, whether it be media, whether it be on the radio, if you start off with saying, hey, we've got this happening, da, 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 then people are going to listen, people are going to read. And that's, in a sense, controlling the narrative. And especially if it's local, the more localized, as you pointed out, the more important message that makes.
Yeah, Hunter, it's a really good point, and I think there's really no doubt about it. But when you don't have someone sort of watching the public process, then the public process starts to get pushed further and further and further and further behind closed doors and in casual conversations. See, the way open meeting laws work in the state is that, a lot of people think it's just having a quorum together. If you have a quorum together, you can't talk about matters of the public trust. And public trust meaning anything related to what you have to say grace over in terms of policy or decision making or whatever. But to protect the public trust, that's why we have sunshine laws. That's why we have open meeting laws. It says that you can get together socially, like if you go to a party and other people are there, and you've got other, in the case, say, of the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, you can come together, and you can be together socially. Or say you go to, say, an outdoor expo, and you all end up together at a booth. That's okay. You can do that as long as you don't talk about matters of the public trust. But as my friend Henry Laird, one of the best First Amendment lawyers in Mississippi, points out, and it was tested with the Institutes of Higher Learning, is that you can't even have one-on-one conversations about matters of public trust. See, the point is we want anything related to the public trust to be in the public trust. We want it to be out there so people can understand the thinking that goes into making decisions. We want people to understand the debates that are taking place. We should protect the public trust. That's extremely important, isn't it, Hunter?
Well, and I think that's another one of the things you can use social media to your advantage, because, like, for example, cities such as the city of Pasco Sham, city of Long Beach, now all of their, at least most of their meetings are shot on Facebook Live. And so then you can see the reaction, you can see, the different levels of debate that are going on. And this is a lot of time where people now can make stories out of, of this, that, and the other. And it's important, if you're concerned about your community, that you participate in some way, either going to the board meetings or watching them on Facebook Live. So.
Yeah, but here's the point, though, and I just want to drive this home. We're seeing more of that, and I think that's really good, that YouTube and Facebook were able to actually watch the proceedings. But what we don't know is, did they have a meeting before the meeting? Did they make some decisions before they got there? Did they know that was going to be controversial? So let's clear the deck on that just a little bit before we get into the meeting. See, a lot of that happens. And
that's their agendas that are set in stone. And exactly, that's 100%.
We don't want that. We don't want that. I'll tell you, for anyone who wants sort of a primer on this, I wrote a piece about the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks specifically, as it relates to open meetings, and it's a good piece to read to get reminded about open meeting laws in the state of Mississippi. And you can see it at SuperTalk.fm. You just click on news in terms of how to navigate the site. Click on news and then opinions, and you can go find that piece. It applies not just to the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. It applies to city councils or any other public board. It's important. Hunter, let me tell you one other thing that you'll find interesting. I wrote that piece and been putting a lot of pressure on the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, because I have discovered too much of their work happens behind the scenes. It's just a fact. Sure. So I write that piece, and there's this big discussion happening about chronic wasting disease. I don't think that the commission is managing that disease well. I think there are certain commissioners who are beginning to understand. There's at least one and a guy by the name of Billy Munger who's been on it from the beginning. But the reality is we've got to do a better job managing that disease. And so I've kind of used that as an example. Where the week that I wrote the piece about open meeting laws, I get a phone call that tells me specifically what they're going to do at the next commission meeting. It tells me they're not going to entertain a motion, and here's what they're going to do, and this is what they're going to do. And I said, did you find the irony of this? That the week that I write a column about open meetings, that you're calling me to tell me that you guys have already decided how this is going to play out in the public domain? You don't see a problem with that? You don't see the irony in that? But it happens every day, Hunter. It happens every day.
Certainly the same thing when I wrote the editorial about tourism in South Mississippi and how the board of directors of local hospitals, now I didn't indicate, but I think some of them read into who I was talking about, how these board of directors are people that are not medically inclined, and how they're make decisions for the county of medical hospitals, and they have no medical experience. That to me is a very triggering to saying to, the supervisors, the legislature, the governor, that this needs to be changed, because how am I going to let somebody, when I'm in the hospital, with the equipment that they're using that's not articulate, that's not adequate, being able to take care of me because the board of directors said we need this equipment versus that, but they have no experience. So with the health.
Yeah, it's troubling, but it's important. And again, it comes back to as resources have dwindled in news organizations, we're not able to play the watchdog role, the sunlight role, the way we should. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we're going to kind of shift gears and talk about the Saints and the Pelicans and Southern Miss baseball and basketball. There's a lot still to talk about. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. Boy, one of the things that I enjoy is every single Friday we have the opportunity to chat with Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. He's a great columnist around the Saints and Pelicans and all things sports. And he is an award winner. He's on the NFL Hall of Fame selection committee. He's just a good dude. But he's not alone, man. Hunter Dawkins, and I don't know how he does it. Hunter Dawkins, who has the Gazebo Gazette, and he also is a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News, also plays very close attention to the Saints and Pelicans and whatever. But anyway, Hunter, I don't know how you keep up with it all, but it's great to see the Saints finally pull together a new offensive staff and make a decision to go in a different direction.
Yeah, it's kind of 50-50 there, Ricky. Is it Dennis Allen's last stand? That's one of the ideas that I was thinking about coming up with an article for, because this is generally the idea. You lose your whole offensive staff when the front office management tells you that it needs to be something different. You bring them in and either they work or they don't. That's going to depend on your future as a head coach, at least. And I'm not sure exactly what we're going to get. I'm not sure if we're going to get Kyle Shanahan's offense, 2.0 or something as such, but they've, they have definitely dug their hole on that level. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Denver has a pretty successful team, because virtually every single guy from our team is going over to Denver now. So yeah.
It is, but boy, they made the tough decision to release Russell Wilson. So
that's right.
It's going to be interesting to see who they pick up. So free agency starts for the Saints next week, and of course we're just fresh off the combine, but still got rumors swirling about Marshawn Lattimore, and we may, Jeff says we could see one or two surprises. What are you hearing anything about any of that?
Well, with Marcus May just being released too, and they're also looking into restructuring a bunch of the defensive linemen. They already have Shepard. They already restructured his contract, and I'm not necessarily sure where they're going to go with DeMario, because DeMario has been there for 13 years. I mean, even though he's probably playing his best the last 5 years, it's more or less, what can we do to make this team fit the salary cap? Just like it's always been the last few years, Mickey Loomis gets in a salary cap hell, and yeah, we sometimes restructure the contracts and make everybody work. And so what usually comes out on the field is something a little bit different than what everybody thinks. So.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch that. That's for sure. And they always, they as Jeff pointed out, they sent just about everybody to combine, and when a lot of NFL teams are not doing that anymore, but they're looking for that diamond in the rough. They're looking for that guy that nobody else is paying attention to.
Sean Payton said to me, he said in our conversation I have that we go by the walk on water. That's who we're looking for as a player. I mean, that's what your Bryce Young, which is what they had thought. Carolina had obviously thought about that. That's why they selected him first over C.J. Stroud, not knowing that C.J. Stroud had more of the walk on water than Bryce Young, at least in the draft. But that's the kind of players that everybody's looking for. So
yeah. Anything else about the Saints before we move on to the Pelicans?
Well, just the draft and the OTAs coming up. That's really where you're going to see what happens. Right now I'm still kind of trying to see. Now, of course, we need offensive linemen more than anything else, and that's really where I think the next ballpark figure for this new offensive staff and everybody's going to come within.
Yeah, because as you know, with our new offensive coordinator, the thing he's going to be really focused on because of the offense that he's going to run is you got to have a running game.
Exactly.
And we need big time adjustment to our ability to be able to run, and that's going to put a lot of focus on the offensive line.
That's right.
Hey, listen, the Pelicans, you and I have talked about this the last few years. Our superstar has not been healthy past January. So Zion is relatively healthy now. We've got some great young stars. We've got some good maturity. What do you think? Now that we're at this moment for the team, do you think they can go on a run?
Well, Ricky, remember what I told you about this? That the reason I think that this team could potentially be better is because the focus is not all on Zion like it had been the last few years.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
More on a team game. You might have a player like Brandon Ingram or C.J. McCollum or even a Jose Alvarado or Herb Jones pick up where Zion is not there. And he's gotten a lot more assists this year. He's been dropping, some dimes on defense here and there. Everywhere else, this team is more of a focused team. Now, the biggest struggle, as I told a few guys last week in New Orleans, is that the biggest struggle for this team is can they get it on? They've beaten teams that they're supposed to beat, winning the games against teams that they've been crushed against, some teams like the Boston Celtics, the Denver Nuggets, the LA Clippers, teams that they have, are kind of at the same level, if not worse. Then they're not coming across the finish line yet. And of course, they didn't make any moves in the trade deadline, so that means that they trust what they have. David Griffin is definitely involved in that trust, but we'll see what happens.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch the Pelicans during their playoffs, and I hope you're right. They get a run, because you know what's interesting, because they'll kind of lay a little bit of an egg in a game, and then they'll come back and toast that team. So they have it in them.
Indiana Pacers last week.
Indiana Pacers just happened.
They got really blown out, and then they came back and blew them out, and they blew them out in Indiana. And so I'm like, it's definitely Jekyll and Hyde moment with that, but they've got more Eastern Conference games coming up here, and those teams and how they show on the road will really depend on where they're at. They're currently, I think they're tied for sixth, because you have to be in the top six to get to the NBA playoff before the instead of the in-house thing the NBA does with 10 teams. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they don't want to. They want to avoid that this year. And what's cool about them is they have a lot of home games, so it will be. They've got a chance to really go on a run.
Absolutely.
Southern Miss baseball is cranking up. Southern Miss basketball. What's your prediction on basketball as far as the Sun Belt Conference is concerned?
It's weird, Ricky, because they were playing very well, obviously, until Coach Ladner, one of my mentors, he had a heart attack, and then they kind of had a little bit of a downfall. Then they picked up, their last 2 home games, and then the last 2 road games of the last of the regular season, they got blown out both times. And it's just weird because I know they don't necessarily have all their players in right now, but I mean, it's, that's one of the unbelievable things, Ricky, is that you look at the sidelines for Southern Miss, you have a freaking pretty much an All-American. You have 3 4-star guys sitting on the bench from either being hurt or something as such. And then when they get back in, you just have to find that camaraderie. And that's something that Juan Cardona, the associate head coach, and I talked about, is trying to find that camaraderie and being able to develop at the last minute. They could have a really good run, or they could lose in the first round on Thursday. It's kind of ironic. A prediction of mine is that I think they'll get to at least the semifinals, and then they'll run into somebody like James Madison or Troy, and however they depend. Although I think James Madison is a lot more overrated than most people believe. But that being said, that's that. So
what's your read on Southern Miss baseball? Good pitching so far.
They've started off, and as Richard and Michael and Brian had Coach Ostrander on the every Monday with, you kind of hear about what he's saying. He's more focused on their pitching, and their pitching has been pretty dominant right now with Nico Mazza and their second guy on Fridays and Saturdays. They've pretty much owned those games, but they've got to. It's got to be a little bit better pill to swallow, at least during midweek games and on Sundays. So,
wow, they've got some stars on this team. It's going to be very interesting to watch how they do. Southern Miss baseball has been a fan favorite for a few years now, hasn't it?
2 super regionals they've hosted. That's hard. You won't find that in any regional team. That's one of the questions I ask everybody. Would you rather be a team that wins a national championship in 1 year and the next 4 years you're terrible, or would you rather, host 2 super regionals, be consistently well?
Hey, when we come back, we'll talk to Hunter about some mental health bills that are currently in the legislature. I also want to tell him we'll talk a little bit about Medicaid expansion. It's amazing watching that process go forward. We'll see you more after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Hunter Dawkins. I love visiting with Hunter. He's a community newspaper publisher. He's also a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News. So if you haven't looked up Gazebo Gazette in Pass Christian, Long Beach, and that part of sort of western Harrison County, I would encourage you to look it up. It's a terrific publication. And I admire Hunter for staying in the trenches and making success out of what we all knew in the media industry was important, and that is that local news. Local is where the action happens, and that's where he has placed his bet, that's for sure. Hey, we've got a couple of mental health bills in the legislature that are being looked at now. We'll talk about that in just a second. But Medicaid expansion, I'm amazed. We had such a good vote coming out of the House of Representatives. This new Speaker of the House is all in. Delbert Hosemann is all in. So, they're moving this thing forward. And, the governor pushing back has not stopped them at all from doing what they believe is going to be important for Mississippi.
Their surprising thing, Ricky, is the people that are opposed to it. Now, I don't know why they've been opposed to it, but, casting on the vote, there are a few members of Coast delegation that maybe they feel that their constituents or so are not for that because, they're relating it to the Obamacare, level. But that's, of course, as you and I have discussed that in the past, it's not really what the plan is for on this. And I think Tate Reeves has been following a lot of that whole idea. Every time Medicaid expansion is mentioned, he calls it Obamacare. That being said, you and I have discussed, and I'm sure Jason White and Delbert Hosemann have both, had that discussion, and they don't want to go in the level of where Tate Reeves certainly feels like it's going. So,
yeah, I think the governor has focused on this issue from a pure political point of view because he's kind of all in. And what Delbert and the speaker have done, and a growing list of legislators have done, is join with them in saying we've got a problem in healthcare in Mississippi, and we have too many working poor in this state that don't have coverage, and it's pay me now or pay me later. We've said no to billions of dollars. And can a state like Mississippi do that? I mean, can a state like Mississippi continue forward in that way when we know we've got problems? It's not the single solution to the problem. But as Gerard Gibbard, who's done a terrific job of diving into this, has said, this is a conversation we need to have. I've written a column about this is the conversation we need to have. Gerard is conservative. I'm conservative. Jason White, the speaker, is conservative. Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann is conservative. And those joining with them are conservative. So anyone who opens it up and starts to look at it for what it is starts to see, wow, we can't just turn this away anymore. It's the law of the land, and Mississippi has got too many challenges in its hospital system to turn it away. And so I'm thrilled they're having the conversation.
And Ricky, the most important thing, and I should have brought that up too, is even though we are a state primarily run by conservatives, this whole idea is about Mississippians. It's not about, this whole idea of being conservative versus being the other way. It's about Mississippians.
Yeah, how many working poor are conservative? I mean, see, people who get their head around this complicated issue, you start to realize, what have they been saying no to all these years? Where would we be today? Especially 51% of Mississippians live in rural areas. You've seen rural hospitals go to heck in a handbasket. We've got work to do. I see it myself when I'm up at my place in the Mississippi Delta. It's not good. Mental health bills, real quick before we end the show. What's up there?
Well, there has been pointed out by several media publications, there are bills that are being worked on that got through the House, and I think there are a few in the Senate who've gotten through, that mental health patients not be put into prisons. And that's a certain and important thing that I feel too, Ricky, is, in Harrison County, I remember covering the supervisors meetings a few years ago where Sheriff Peterson and Dr. Marlon Ladner were big on trying to keep this from happening. The mental health patients, as you know, what's been established in the hospitals down here is, after 3 days, if they can't solve, or if they can't provide any more care, they send those individuals to prison. They're trying to stop that in the legislature. The Coast delegation's done a pretty good job, including Kevin Felcher, who's really been big on that. And we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, Kevin is a passionate leader, and it's good to see him on that. Any other bills around mental health that we ought to talk about?
I think there's one Senate bill that's more or less trying to be able to provide a facility instead of a prison level system where these individuals are locked up and such, to be able to create and provide facilities for this. But I don't know where either one of them is going, actually. So.
Hey, listen, in the future, we'll talk a bit more about the emergency medical service change. We're doing it at a county level versus municipalities. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. And listen, I really appreciate you staying tuned and staying focused on the issues. And I look forward to chatting with you next time, my friend.
Ricky, it's always a pleasure, and I thank you very much.
You bet, man. This has been Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.